Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Communications at SBAM, and I want to start off by welcoming one of our new VIP members. They're Ann Standig Electric, a new VIP member out of Wixom, Michigan. So thanks for joining. All right, so Brian, big updates happening on Friday, related to the Earned Sick Time Act and minimum wage. So let's start with the biggest changes.
So the biggest changes, the ones that are easier to describe, are on the minimum wage front. So before, minimum wage was going to go to 12.48 as of Friday, and it did. Okay, so that didn't change, but it will ramp its way up over 3 years to $15 an hour. And the previous schedule is going to be 4 years to 14.97, basically $15 an hour. So the regular minimum wage will ramp up faster, but the first year is the same. The tipped wage credit is preserved for now, so it's based on the regular minimum wage, but it's at the same percentage of the regular minimum wage. So that will, over the course of the next several years, all the way to 2031, it'll ramp up from 38% where it's at today to 50%. If you're not in the business, you don't know what that means. You don't really need to know what it means, but if you are in the business, that's the deal. It's right now tipped wage credit 38%. It will go up by 2% each year to 50%, and then it will freeze. So that's minimum wage, minimum wage. On the Earned Sick Time Act, there are lots of administrative changes. So there, what I consider to be the biggest changes, first is that those that are classified as small businesses, it's 1 to 10 employees. It used to be 1 to 9. It got changed to 1 to 10 under this legislation. Do not have to comply with this law until October 1st. So there was a delay in for those businesses, which I'm kind of need to eat my words, but in a good way on that one. I did not think a delay was going to happen, and it didn't across the board. But for one segment, for those that fit the definition of small business under this law, they you have until October 1st to comply. Everybody else, comply as soon as possible, like it's in effect right now. So that's one change. Another big change is that there is an allowance now for, and a very explicit allowance for front loaded, meaning you can award all the time up front and then not have to do the accruals. Before, even if you awarded all the time up front, you still had to do the accruals. That's not the case anymore. You can do it up front, you avoid the accruals, and when you do front load, you don't have to carry anything over to the next year. Okay, so there's a benefit. If you're doing the accrual basis, it's the same number, but for small businesses, there's no unpaid mandate. There's only the paid benefit of 40 hours. You can cap the usage at 40 hours for bigger companies at 72 hours. So there's another difference is the carryover provisions that if you are accruing, you still do have a carryover requirement for unused time, but that carryover requirement is more limited. It can be limited to whatever that annual limit is. So 40 hours or 72 hours, depending on if you're a smaller company or a larger company. Uh, they also, a really big change was now you can have notification requirements. Remember, there was a no call, no show 3 day issue. 3 days, no call, no show, and the employer can't really do anything or much about it. Now you can enforce, you can have a policy that requires notification, and you can take disciplinary action up to and including firing if somebody is a no call, no show. So that no call, no show issue is basically solved. A little caveat to that, but basically solved. The also the presumption of employer guilt. Right. Previous, if there was a complaint, there was the regulators were required in the law to assume that the employer was guilty unless proven innocent, and that presumption has been removed. Lots of changes throughout the law. It's frankly, a lot to keep track of, but those are some of the big items that I wanted to highlight, at least in this format of our show as we move forward. And as usual, we will be your partners right along the way in your journey to compliance to this new law.
Yeah, so we are your partners along the way. Thanks for mentioning that. We did set up two webinars Friday. We actually have another one today at 4 p.m. where you, Brian, will kind of go over all of the changes following the FAQs from the state of Michigan. So there is still time to register. There is space at that 4 p.m. webinar. And then we have another compliance webinar this Thursday at 2 p.m. So those can both be found sbam.org/events. And then finally, we're updating our toolkit as well. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just say that when the 4 o'clock webinar today, if you want to get in on that, I'm just going to go through the state's FAQs. They put regulatory guidance out on Friday, and I have analyzed every last word of those, and we'll go through one by one to get a full picture and how the state regulators are interpreting the new law, which I think is generally correct. There's a few areas that I've asked them to consider making changes in, and I'll point those out to you if you participate in that webinar. On Thursday, we're going to get back into just essentially the compliance and implementation mode. So we'll have, I hope by, say late tomorrow, the our templates and our compliance toolkit updated with the new law. And then on Thursday, we'll really kind of work our way through what it takes to, the decisions that you go through and the steps that you need to take in order to become fully compliant. So that's generally, and then we'll do that. We'll keep on adding those until people stop coming to them. So it's not one and done. And of course, our website is going to be a constant resource for you to check in on as you go down the path of amending your policies and positions. So honestly, we spent so much time in the last couple of months on this issue. I don't know what we're going to talk about when this is all said and done, but I'm sure something else will come up. But we'll expect probably in the next month you will have many opportunities, multiple opportunities to plug in, keep on top of things, ask questions, and hopefully get to the bottom of it so you feel comfortable that you're in a good position to comply and stay on the right side of the regulators.
Yes, so thank you all for your patience as we get these toolkits updated. Those of you who've already purchased it will get a notification when they're available for download. If you haven't purchased it yet or downloaded it yet, because it is free for some of our members, we'll let you know when that's available. All right, so ESTA and minimum wage are settled for now. But last week we also saw some movement on the Corporate Transparency Act. What's the latest there?
So the Corporate Transparency Act, there have been multiple injunctions, but one of them fell at the Supreme Court. And what the government has done is taken that Supreme Court decision to knock out the district court decision for the last standing injunction. So I said a bunch of legal words there, but essentially what it means is that the law, the Corporate Transparency Act, as of now, is back in effect. So there is no injunction on the Corporate Transparency Act anywhere in the country, which means that compliance is now required, except that FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, that is required to enforce this law. They've said two things that I think mean that you probably ought to hold off a little bit here before you file. I mean, you can just file anytime you want. I'm not saying don't file, but I'm saying you don't need to file yet because they did a 30-day delay. So they're saying, hey, the court decision just came down. We understand that people can't just comply overnight. You have 30 days. But they also said in on their guidance on the website that they are considering additional exemptions. The law that Congress passed actually gives FinCEN the ability to do exemptions for entities they deem as low risk. I don't know whether that will be a lot of entities that they are considering exempting or just a few, if they'll be kind of broad sweeping things. But until they tell us who they're considering exempting, you probably ought to hold off a little bit longer on this. So stay tuned. We'll keep our website updated. There's no reason not to file if you want to just get it off your plate and get it done. I wouldn't blame you one bit for that. But if you are apprehensive on doing this filing, then for privacy reasons, then there's really no harm in waiting until the end of the deadline that FinCEN has created and seeing if maybe they'll exempt. And then, lest anybody forget, SBAM's lawsuit is still active on this, and we could get a decision any day. I thought we'd have one in late January, and here we are, late February, and we don't have a decision yet. But um, it has to come at some point. All the arguments are made, all the hearings are done, the arguments, the briefings back and forth. We're just waiting for the judge's decision on that. It could be any time. And yeah, I kind of like our chances on it. You know, it's not a guarantee. I can't get inside the mind of the judge, but based on the questions that were asked during the oral arguments, I went away from it, I think, feeling a little more comfortable than the government side anyway. So that's another kind of X factor that's just hanging out there. Could come down any minute.
All right. So let's go back to ESTA and then talk a little bit about national politics too, relating to Governor Whitmer. She kind of took some heat from her own side for signing the ESTA and minimum wage changes on Friday. And then there's some other heat on statements regarding national politics. So bring us up to speed.
Yeah, so the governor, when she signed the Earned Sick Time Act changes and the minimum wage changes, there was definitely from unions in particular and some other left-leaning groups, she did take some hits, and so and this is kind of how it goes. Whenever you kind of if you try to do something more centrist, you end up oftentimes the people on your own side come after you the hardest. So we saw in the convention over the weekend some pretty strong words from the president of the UAW that seemed to be pretty well tailored, or not by name, but really aimed at the governor for signing this legislation. We also saw a group. You know, it's not people have talked about Governor Whitmer running for president for the last few years. You know, she is a legit contender if she wanted to go after it, which I have no inside knowledge that she does or she doesn't. However, there is a very well-known group of funders on the Democratic side of the political aisle, national funders, that when she signed that legislation, it killed her chances to run for president. That's a little over dramatic. There's very rarely is there one thing that could do that, but it will give you the sense of the type of weight that these types of policies and the forces at play here, that, you know, our side, the business side, which is also, we view it very much as the employee side as well. You can't be pro job while being anti-employer. So we are we feel very, very strongly that these changes were the right thing to do for employees and employers. But the people in the political world definitely take shots for doing reasonable things. The So I thought it bore mentioning here. The other thing is that the governor has been pretty direct, saying she's looking for ways to work with President Trump, which is different than a lot of her colleagues, governors, other governors around the country. And so these two things happening at the same time, I think, are kind of, I don't know, it's creating, you're seeing some people a little riled up when it comes to Governor Whitmer, who generally has enjoyed very populist across the board support. But it does give it, she's a very, very skilled person kind of maneuvering through the political minefields that exist today. And so she was in DC over the weekend, and said, you know, has basically said something that's pretty I would say logical for a person who is the responsibility of being the governor of the state, saying, look, I got to find ways to work with the president, even though we're on different sides of things. And then she gave some examples of some issues. I don't think there's any question that that's the right posture for a governor to take. But again, it comes at a cost, and I think it makes sense to recognize when people are willing to do things, even when they come at a cost politically. So the final thing, though, I'll say, which was kind of uncharacteristic that I saw reported over the weekend. The governor and the Speaker of the House have both put out plans on fixing the roads, and they're very different plans, but they're both plans. Okay. And I think the governor has been a little bit frustrated with some of her legislative partners on her side of the aisle that have not been willing to put out plans or to consider big changes. and she made a statement that that only Speaker Hall, Republican, and her, Democrat, have the guts or the brains to put a deal on the table. I got to tell you, I was like, what? I when I read that, I was like, I'm surely that's not what I just read. And sure enough, it is. So it just seems like the political dynamics and forces that continue to surprise me. I mean, these um, a statement like that was I was just really surprised because it is kind of a shot at her own side of the aisle. So all of these things kind of coming in, signing the Eston minimum wage compromise bills, saying that she wanted to figure out a way to work with the president, even though she politically disagrees with him on things, and then taking a shot, kind of at her own side within the legislative process for lack of action on roads. Um, those are things that just bam, 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 all in the same week. Really something. And every single one of them I find somewhat surprising.
Definitely. All right. So among all the discussion regarding the trade with Canada, there's actually been some bridge and tunnel developments. What can you share?
Yeah, so there's two things. There's the tunnel that will enclose line 5. So this is the oil and gas pipeline that right now is on the lake bed, goes through the Straits of Mackinac, and there's this years long fight and debate over putting it in a dry tunnel 100 feet below in bedrock 100 feet below the lake bed. And so the there was a court decision which was really questioning the crux of the case was should the environmental impact study, normally when you do something like this you have to do an environmental impact study, and what the Public Service Commission looked at was the impact of putting a tunnel in. And what environmental activists had sued, saying is that no, that's not good enough. You should do an environmental impact study of just fossil fuels being used in the world. And this moves fossil fuels. That was a like breathtaking a claim for an expansion of scope that has to be considered. The courts did not surprisingly, shut down that line of thinking. That when you look at an environmental impact study on a project, you don't look at, something as broad as the use of natural gas, for example, in creating energy, in supplying energy. So on the tunnel side, and Enbridge is a Canadian company that owns that pipeline. And then on the bridge, it was a couple of things that happened that were kind of or reporting on the two bridges right now that go to Canada. Um, the truck traffic, and it's to a point where it's not the lowest, it dropped way down, of course, during the pandemic, and it had come back some, but the Ambassador Bridge has considered to or continued to decline or posted some pretty low numbers last year, and then the Blue Water Bridge on the rise, and of course the Gordie Howe Bridge coming right up. Now you might ask why would that be? And one of the things is that the Ambassador Bridge itself doesn't connect freeway to freeway. And the Canadian side, it takes a long time from where you land to get to a freeway. So the truck traffic, which carries trade back and forth, the automotive um, supply chain, it the Ambassador Bridge just is so far away from connecting to a freeway to get to the rest of the automotive supply chain is really makes that transportation option pretty inefficient. So over time, it does appear just more and more has moved to the Blue Water Bridge. Now, the difference with the Gordie Howe Bridge, the new bridge that's being constructed there, is that it is a freeway to freeway connection on the Canadian side and the US side. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a recovery at the Detroit corridor after that happened. But it caught my eye because there's a lot of debate right now about trade with Canada and whether tariffs, take effect, and the USMCA, the U.S. Mexico Canada trade agreement, um, just all of the aspects with respect to trade within the North American contact or continent. This particular report of the federal numbers of the border crossings of trucks, which are carrying um, manufacturing parts mainly for automotive, um, caught my attention.
All right, let's go back to some news of last week, with kind of a surprising announcement that a Supreme Court justice resigned. So tell us a little bit more and especially what this means for the makeup of the court going forward.
So not just the Supreme Court justice, but the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Beth Clement. So Beth Clement was a Snyder appointee, Snyder's last appointee to the court, and had stood for re-election or election since then, and was in the midst of an 8-year term, and had decided to step down. And Beth Clement is pretty young, kind of the prime of her career, and is going back to the going back into the private sector. So this was kind of a surprise. I mean, not a surprise from the sense of a person who has the type of career and options that she would have would find an option that she liked and wanted to go to and lead the public sector. But a lot of times when people leave and it leaves the governor appointment to fill the rest of the term, a lot of times people will hang around in their term until there's a governor of the same party. And when I say party, I'm using it somewhat loosely. Judges, Supreme Court justices are supposed to be nonpartisan, but they are nominated by political party conventions. So you can't really escape that the political affiliation of these people as they go into office. And so by leaving, what it means is that somebody who was originally appointed by a Republican will be replaced by Governor Whitmer, of course, a Democrat. And so the makeup of the court at that point will almost complete a just such a vast swing in where it wasn't that long ago when Republican elected Supreme Court justices held the majority, and when Beth Clement is replaced, it the Democratic nominated justices will have a 6-1 majority, and now they already had a 5-2, right? So I don't expect the decisions themselves will be very different than what they were before. But what it does mean is that this this relatively new majority is cemented pretty tight, that it will be pretty likely be pretty durable because only 2 seats come up every election, and Supreme Court justice incumbents get reelected at an extremely high rate. So it's really not unless it's only if somebody resigns from the court and or doesn't run for reelection that you truly have an open seat. Otherwise, the incumbents almost always win.
All right, finally, let's close today's show with a 2026 election watch. There's actually quite a bit of action last week.
Yeah, there sure was, and it's because of the political party convention. So, what I'd committed to the audience here of doing over the course of this cycle, which has already started, the 2026 elections, which will include United States Senate and governor, is whenever I see something that to me tells me something or means something about the 2026 cycle, we're going to talk about it. I'll tell you about it. Well, the political parties had conventions over the weekend to elect their new leadership. So these are the party faithful. They're the delegates to the Republican Party and the delegates to the Democratic Party. They join or they meet together and in this case they're picking their new leadership, the chair of the party. The on with among the Democrats, it was not a surprise that former Senator Curtis Hertel was elected as the chair of the party. On the Republican side, there was a bit of a surprise where current Senator Runstead was elected chair, and he defeated Meshawn Maddock, a former co-chair of the party, and who was endorsed by the president. So a bit of a surprise, well, not a bit, a pretty big surprise there. So that's not the thing though about the 2026 election. What I was looking for was who attended those conventions and had like a real presence there. If you're running for governor or and seeking a major party nomination for governor or U.S. Senate, this is exactly the kind of place that you would want to be to meet with the main volunteers, to be present, to be in front of people. And um, and so for governor, an old name resurfaced at the convention as a top level sponsor and also a decent presence there. You remember the guy who ran a couple years ago, Perry Johnson? He was there. So I hadn't talked about him yet. A previous candidate for governor in the previous election. Senator Eric Nesbitt was there. We've talked about him several times. Mike Cox, former Attorney General, we've talked about him as a candidate. He was at this convention. John James was at the convention as well. So Congressman John James, who is widely believed to be seriously considering a run for governor. So several of those candidates for governor, including one we hadn't mentioned before, Perry Johnson. So at the convention, had a presence there and further evidence about intentions to perhaps run for governor. I've also heard from several people that uh, former Speaker of the House Tom Leonard has been doing meetings with people saying he's pretty close to deciding to run for governor. Okay, so that's the Republican side. Among the Democrats, we saw Garland Gil, and I say we, I wasn't at either of these conventions, okay, but I know people. And so Garland Gilchrist was present at the convention, but Gretchen Whitmer was not. She was in Washington, D.C. Gilchrist was at the convention. Jocelyn Benson as well, and Chris Swanson, the sheriff of Genesee County, who is an announced candidate on the Democratic side of the ticket for governor. All people that we've talked about before on this show that had a presence at their conventions. Again, not surprises, but further evidence of what they're thinking. For the Senate, let's start with the Democrats here. Senator Mallory McMorrow, Haley Stevens, Dana Nessel, Abdul El Sayed were all there. But you know who wasn't there at the convention? Pete Buttigieg. So he's widely been considered to have, and others seem to know that he's seriously considering running for U.S. Senate. But the fact that he was not at this convention tells me maybe he's not as close to deciding to run as what some people think, or maybe he's decided not to. Michigan is a very parochial place. I've found that when you're not from here, it's hard to kind of get in the political system. And he's not from Michigan. He lives in Traverse City now, but not from Michigan originally. So I've been in a little town in Michigan, and I've lived here since 1997, and I'm still like a new guy in town. So just and that's not unusual. The and then I thought it was kind of interesting. It was reported that Dana Nessel, Attorney General, potential candidate for U.S. Senate, said that she has tremendous respect for Pete Buttigieg and recognizes that he's well known and liked throughout Michigan. However, given that it's unclear that he will run, she's seriously considering exploring the U.S. Senate seat. Um, so obviously, she's giving deference to Pete Buttigieg, but saying, kind of inching toward deciding. And if that's the case, she seems to think maybe he's not running. Okay, so that's the Democratic side. Among Republicans, who was there? Um, Mike Rogers, who just lost to Alyssa Slotkin by the smallest margin in the history of Senate elections in Michigan. Tudor Dixon, you might recall, ran against Whitmer the second time for the reelection, and a couple of representatives. Well, one federal representative, Bill Huizenga, is reportedly thinking about it, giving it a serious look. And then a state representative, Brian Postumus, who's the son of the former Lieutenant Governor, Dick Postumus, and then also State Senator Jonathan Lindsay from Southwest Michigan. That's the roundup. I mean, so these people were all active in part of the convention. The only one, again, the big signal. It's not surprising. If you're thinking of running, you needed to be at these conventions at your respective party. But Pete Buttigieg not being there, I'm kind of leaning toward thinking he's probably not going to run.
All right, really great insight as always. Thanks, Brian. That is our show for today. We will be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock. Have a great week.
See you next time.